Hello citizens and welcome back. In today's video, I want to take a look at the item tiering system planned for Star Citizen and how it might impact the balance of the game. As always, if you like this video, sacrifice a like and a comment to the YouTube algorithm and subscribe for more. Also, don't forget to check out my Star Citizen community apps, the Armory and the Hauler, and the Comm Relay podcast. And here's a shout out to our amazing patrons for their support of the channel and everything else I do. So, what is item tiering? As a part of crafting, CIG are planning to introduce several tiers for each item and ship. At the time of writing, we're supposed to get 3 tiers for items, components, and other gear, and 5 tiers for ships and vehicles. Now, why would you want items and ships of higher tiers? Well, simply because they are better in some aspects by having better stats than their lower tier counterparts. How do you obtain higher tier items? There will actually be a few ways to do this. You can of course buy them from shops or other players, or you can loot them or get them as a mission reward, or you can of course craft them in a fabricator. But crafting requires resources and blueprints of the appropriate type. Now, the crafting process is pretty complex from start to finish, so if you're interested in hearing about it in more detail, I recommend you watch my video from 2 weeks ago where I drill down into each one of the steps required for crafting, and if I don't forget, the link to it should be appearing in the corner right now. So why could item tiers cause trouble with the balance? Well, imagine this scenario. You're a fairly new player. You just bought a new fighter and want to take it out to do some NPC bounties. You're doing okay because you're pretty good at dogfighting, but you're unlucky and encounter another player who wants to pick a fight. No problem, they have the same ship as you. So this should boil down to who is a better pilot, right? Technically, yes. But practically, there is a very solid chance you will find yourself at a major disadvantage. You end up losing the fight because you took too much damage and didn't deal a lot. Why is that? Well, your opponent had a high tier ship with high tier components, so you didn't really stand a chance from the beginning. This doesn't just apply to combat though. All ships, components, and items have multiple tiers. So let's take a look at a different scenario. Let's say that you just got a prospector and want to start mining in a fairly popular area. Let's say you're joined by a few of your friends who have been mining longer and have upgraded their ships. You start noticing that they are outperforming you in every regard. They can scan over longer distances, they can crack bigger rocks, and get higher quality ore. You realize that you are making much less credits in the same amount of time because your ship is low tier. Now, is this really a problem? Well, kind of. On one hand, it makes sense for players who have been playing for longer or players that dedicate more time to the game to have better items and ships. On the other hand, this advancement can't be unrestricted, because to an extent it removes skill from the equation. In some scenarios, that is. Also, it puts new players or less involved players at a serious disadvantage if it's unchecked. This problem is actually not new or limited to Star Citizen. Elite Dangerous has seen the same issue when engineered components were introduced. And for those of you who don't play Elite, engineered components are very similar to tiered components in Star Citizen, with the exception that you need to travel to a special NPC to get the upgrade, and you might need some very rare resources or to complete some missions to unlock access to that NPC. However, engineered components transform PvP interactions in the open universe of Elite, and there is some speculation that it made some players switch to the co-op or solo modes. So what measures could CIG use to mitigate this problem? First of all, we have to understand we still want it to be possible to have high tier equipment. We also want this to be rewarding. But we need to put limits in place that will prevent high tier equipment from eliminating skill. Fortunately, the crafting system itself comes pre-built with a few guards against this. The initial assumption is that high tier blueprints will be rare, so to get high tier blueprints it might be easier to research low tier blueprints. which requires a lot of time and specific resources or meeting other conditions. But that's not the only guard that's built into the crafting system. Crafting a high tier item or upgrading an existing item to increase its tier will require rare resources, and we know that rare resources will be difficult to obtain. Players will be to gather or refine them in limited amounts, which will limit the amount players can spend on upgrading blueprints and crafting high tier items. So the player will have to choose which high tier items to craft first. The alternative would be to buy high tier items from other players, which will definitely be possible thanks to player-owned stores. But I imagine that this option might be pretty expensive given the effort required to craft these items and components. And the new insurance and warranty system introduces a limiting factor as well, though it might not be as effective. Depending on your level of insurance, when you lose the upgraded ship, you might not be able to claim it back in the upgraded state or at all. You might just end up with getting some credit payment that's some portion of the total value of the ship. So players will either only invest in upgrading their ships with LTI and highest possible insurance level, or they will limit their upgrades to what they're willing to lose. But are there more ways that CAG can help create a more balanced environment? Well, the initial concept of high tier items and upgrading items seems very linear, meaning that a high tier item will be better than a lower tier item in all stats. So what if, instead of a linear upgrade sequence, we introduced an upgrade tree of sorts? Meaning that for every tier you upgrade an item or a blueprint, you get to choose from multiple options. Each option improves some stats of the item as well as worsens some other stats. For example, let's say that you have a blueprint for a laser cannon. You want to increase its tier, so you research it. Once the research is complete, you get to pick. You can increase the rate of fire, but this will make it overheat faster. Or you can increase the number of shots per capacitor charge, but this will increase the power requirement. Or you can increase the damage, but that will decrease how many shots you have. This basically leaves you with two options as you upgrade a blueprint. You can either balance out the tiers and get an item that is slightly better in everything than the base item. Or you can specialize in certain stats to create an item that suits your playstyle better. Keeping with our laser cannon example, let's say you want to use it as a turret weapon. So you prioritize damage and rate of fire since turret capacitors offer enough shots. Or maybe it's the main gun for your Ares, so you want to focus on damage and range. What I'm trying to say is that it will give us a ton of options for how high tier items are going to work and a lot of options to choose from, though it might be a bit too difficult to implement. Also, CAG mentioned that different materials and material quality will impact the final stats of the item, which could actually be a mitigating factor as well. The other option ties into the planned engineering and power management system, but that would only apply to ships. Basically, you would never have enough power to fully power all components if all components are the highest possible tier. This is the solution that Elite partially adopted, and it doesn't really make sense. And this was actually going to be the original plan with power management, but players didn't like it. And it seems like CAG are looking for different ways to introduce challenges to power management. I actually quite like the current implementation, besides the UI that is. You're able to power every component to its desired power level, but if needed you can prioritize power to the components where you need it most. Seems like a good evolution of the power triangle, but we will see what the actual implementation looks like in the future. So is item and blueprint tiering a bad feature? Not really. It adds some flavor to the game and is one of the common MMO features that you would expect in Star Citizen as well. On the other hand, if not properly implemented and balanced, it will introduce more imbalance to a game that already suffers from major balance issues. Balance will eventually improve, but adding more variables into the equation is usually a bad idea. But we will see how and when CIG are going to solve this problem. And with that being said, that's all for tonight. What do you think? Will item tiers break balance? How could CIG address this issue? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, fly safe, and I will see you in the verse.